right, welcome everybody. Let me adjust my camera slightly. Welcome back to Everson Museum of Art Object Study. I am Garth Johnson, the Paul Phillips and Sharon Sullivan Curator of Ceramics at the Everson. Let me go ahead and
there we go.
Let you see me in widescreen for a moment. So I am very happy to announce that the Everson finally has a reopening date. Things are going very well in Syracuse. We are being very good, but you will be able to come back and visit the Everson in person. Members will be able to visit on August 1st, and we are opening to the public on August 2nd. We are taking strict measures for mask wearing and hand sanitization, and we are doing all of the proper mandated things to make sure that you as a visitor can have a safe experience. I think we are also setting aside particular hours for immunocompromised or elderly visitors. So if you'd like to find out any more about that information, you can go to Everson's website, www.everson.org. Couple of quick housekeeping points of order. First, we are going to be sharing a lot of video and looking up close at some images that are in the museum's collection. So if you haven't done it already, if you have your Zoom on the gallery view of all of the people in the sort of Brady Bunch boxes, turn that off and go to the speaker view, because you are going to want to see the big, glorious images when I hold up our Grace and Perry platter or bring up our Ken Price Club Atomica piece. So flip from gallery view to speaker view. The other thing that I encourage everyone to use is the chat feature. So I know that a lot of you know my guest today, Melissa Stern, personally, and a lot of you have incisive, inquiring minds and are going to want to know a ton of things. I would welcome you to use the chat feature, and I will be monitoring the chat feature. First of all, say hi, tell us where you're signing in from. And then any questions you have, leave them there in the chat, and I will be looking at those through the presentation today. Let me go ahead and maybe while we have our screen shared, I will introduce our guest. So my guest today, and really co-host, the topic of this meeting, and I think this is very much like my guest, rather than saying, hey, let's do an entire session about me and make it about me, even though we very well could make it about her and her amazing career and her amazing artwork. She suggested a theme, and one that's really close to her heart, and that is the intersection between ceramics and drawing. So the structure today is that I'm going to invite my guest on and introduce her in just a second, but I'm going to be showing off, as I do through most of these sessions, some pieces from the Everson's permanent collection, and Melissa's really going to be my co-host, and she's going to talk with me about the different approaches to drawing that many of the artists in the Everson's collection have taken over the years. And then we're going to switch gears about halfway through, and we're going to focus exclusively on Melissa's work, and we will kind of reflect on some of the themes that have come up through talking about the Everson's collection in Melissa's work. So I know a lot of you are tuning in to go all Melissa all the time. You're going to get that. But I'm going to make you eat your vegetables first, and we're going to look at some amazing pieces from the Everson's collection. So without further ado, you have seen her mirthful, smiling face come up several times as I've made her laugh. Interdisciplinary artist and journalist, Melissa Stern. So Melissa, howdy.
Hey, thank you. First of all, thank you from the bottom of my wee heart to Garth and the Everson for doing this and inviting me to join. And thank you to all of you folks for taking time from your very, very busy COVID lockdown lives. There's a joke there, to join us. But I am thrilled. We're also flung apart these days. That these Zoom events that you're hosting, Garth, have been a really wonderful way to bring our community together and to draw others in and to have conversations about art rather than politics.
Thank you, although politics have definitely come into play during this time period.
For sure.
So speaking of coronavirus and lockdown, Tell us where you are broadcasting from and how has the sort of enforced solitude been for you as an artist and human?
Well, I'm in upstate New York. I'm in a town called Shokan, about 12 miles west of Kingston, New York. My husband and I fled New York on March 13th. We came back to the city a few times to pick up mail and pick up art supplies because I have a summer studio in a barn that, as I found out the hard way, does not function in cold weather. But so I've been to the city a little bit, but mostly been up here. I have not been enjoying lockdown. I have not been enjoying quarantine. To all of those who say, this is great, more power to you. I think it sucks. And, you know, as the weather got warmer, I certainly was able to get into this barn studio. And as we'll see at the end, I did make a lot of drawings. Did not put my hands in clay for a few months because frankly, it was too cold. And, you know, like no pity party for me, but like many artists, I've had a lot of things canceled, a lot of things postponed. It has been a struggle to kind of, you know, get it together to get back to work. However, this is what we do. And you work through the good times and the bad times. So that may be too much information than you wanted, but I am now working away and really full steam ahead back in the studio, making a lot of sculpture. I don't have pictures of any of that because they're not done. But so, you know, I got it together.
So while we're talking about all of that, and we can come back to it when we focus on your work, you have had some, like everybody, have had some exhibitions put in limbo. Can you tell us what you can about some of those projects and some of the things that actually are on track that you're working for right now?
Well, the biggest, I have to say the biggest, my biggest beef with Donald Trump is that I was supposed to have a pretty giant solo show in Shanghai last November at Longman Art Projects. And first we postponed it because of the trade war with China and 100% behind the gallery's decision. It was then supposed to open in April. Obviously, we did not do that. It now is postponed till the fall. It's a show that will have a catalog, a t-shirt. You know, I'm big on, I love merch. Hopefully, you know, hopefully it will happen. So that's, I have to say that's been the biggest disappointment. We were gonna do a limited edition bronze series. It had a lot of components that I certainly was looking forward to. That's the biggest one.
And can you reveal the next location that your Talking Cure exhibition is going to be making a stop at?
Well, first it will open, the gods and goddesses willing, at the Noyes Museum in New Jersey in January of 2021. And then it will open at the Fuller Craft Museum, which is right outside of Boston, a little later in that year. I actually have forgotten the exact date. I think Beth may be on this call or she's in this Zoom or she's coming on. That seems to be on track. I will be having a solo show in Chicago called Does She or Doesn't She? And for those of you who are old enough or advertising involved enough, it comes from it's a show about hair. And it comes from an old time Clairol hair coloring advertisement called Does She or Doesn't She? And the idea is, you know, hair color so real, does she or doesn't she? But as many of my titles, as you know from many of my titles on everything, I love things that work on different levels. And the idea of something, when you say does she or doesn't she, man, the possibilities are wild as to what that could mean. So I love things with those double levels of meaning. Garth has just disappeared. Oh, there we go.
I'm
So,
sorry, I left my espresso on the espresso machine as I was getting everything ready for this, and nobody wants an under-caffeinated host.
no, in fact, you all should be highly caffeinated at this point.
Indeed.
So the show in Chicago called Does She or Doesn't She is ostensibly about hair, but it's also about identity and how hair, what it all means to women and to men. I mean, hair is important to men. So like most of my work, I hope it will operate on several levels at once.
Excellent. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and shift to looking at some pieces. And we are going to actually introduce, we have a special guest, which I am so excited that the Everson is quickly becoming sort of a major collector of this individual's work. And this individual really served as an incredible mentor for me from the time that I was a very wet behind the ears Nebraska farm boy undergraduate exploring the ceramics world. And that is, of course, the fabulous and handsome Mr. Matt Nolan. So Matt, can you unmute yourself and say hi to everybody?
Hello, how are you? It's good.
Hi, Matt. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, dear. So good to be here with you guys. Just us chickens, you know?
That's upstate lingo for all the rest of you.
Yes.
So I already assigned some superlatives to Matt, incredible, also sort of multifaceted artist. His work came to my attention as a very young man in the early 1990s. And it was really one of the first cases where an artist who I truly looked up to and idolized, you know, was so accessible and so kind and encouraging to me. And, you know, I've been obsessed with his work ever since. And when I got to the Everson Museum as the curator, we already had a terrific piece in our collection. But I found out that for my Matt Nolan money, one of his most fabulous, and I would say most notable pieces was actually in a local collection and had been acquired from one of our Ceramic Nationals exhibition. And for those of you who did not know that this piece entered the Everson's collection, I'm about to reunite some of you and reunite you, Matt, with the testosterone teapots, which I think in terms of scale, iconography, theme, is everything that you want in sort of a classic Matt Nolan piece.
Forgive me for one sec. Forgive me, Garth. I'm getting a lot of messages from people saying that they're having trouble joining, and I don't know if there's a link or people are just untech savvy. Forgive me, Matt, but I just got 10. My husband Jim just walked in and said he can't join.
You know what? You can't use the link. You have to use the ID number, the meeting number.
Oh, really?
The meeting number.
Strange.
Hi, it's Seth. That didn't work for me either. I went through the museum website as per Judith Solomon's advice, and now I'm in.
Hi,
okay.
So I'm Matt Nolan. I'm turning off my mic.
Let's see.
Garth, maybe if there's a way to put that link up.
So what I'm going to do, I will put that link up right now. Let's see, because I should be able to do invite. This is a fresh link. I've done this as a series of invites from the museum, and I was forced to generate a new link. So I don't know if the museum may have sent out an old link accidentally, but I should be able to.
They sent out an old link because I've just got, literally, I'm sorry, I just got 10 more messages from people who said they can't join.
So let's see.
Let's get them on.
That is a sore disappointment. So thank you for everyone who was intrepid enough to be able to do that. The link on the Facebook is wrong. You must use the museum website to join. So, so if you can guide people who are texting you to go to www.everson.org, click on online classes, and you should see the link. Or if they're on Facebook, you can go to the Everson webpage and you can see the streaming live there.
Okay.
Okay, so while Melissa is intrepidly texting a few people, I'm going to go ahead and make my camera mobile here because the testosterone teapot mat is too large for me to pick up without injuring my back. So as I'm venturing over there and making sure that the lid is on it, can you talk a little bit? I know that you always work in series, and can you talk about the series of vessels that were in this this series, and was this originally exhibited at Garth Clark's?
Yes, I can talk about that. This piece is from the early 90s, and at that time, I had shifted away from making more what I would call pattern and decoration decorated vessels that were really more relating to functional objects into the reference of function as sort of a platform for a more conceptual approach that was delineated through narrative painting of these objects. So at that time, I was thinking of, and when we get to the testosterone teapot, it's a good one because you can see I somewhat thwarted the expectation of function to help support the story I was telling. And this was something that I did over many objects. The other piece that Everson has is called Ego, Cup, and Saucer. And I was thinking more of a cup as being a taking form. And so you would fill this cup up, and it has a built-in drain in the bottom, so it can never be filled, just like when we're acting out of our egos. So that gives you an idea of the kind of playful approach I had to these sort of historical or functional forms in this series of objects.
So Matt, can you talk a little bit about the role of drawing in your work? I've witnessed that, particularly since you're working in series, you maintain an active sketchbook and you're constantly kind of sketching out iconography and ideas. But correct me if I'm wrong, I think your drawing practice also extends beyond just using drawing for the sort of preparatory work. Can you sketch that out for us?
Sure. So especially when I was working along the lines of the testosterone teapot, I was really doing a lot more development of my imagery and thinking about how it would play out wrapped around the three-dimensional objects through drawing. I was doing more development drawing that way. And of course, the drawing itself was a huge carrier of the narrative content of my work. It was, I think, the primary interest that I had was as someone drawing and painting. That has evolved quite a bit. The language of my work has changed a lot, and I'm now still thinking of storytelling, but they're much more open to the viewer to overlay in a more abstract language. And the role of drawing kind of separated out from the ceramic objects a bit, and now, I do drawings that are just meant to be drawings and not attached to sculpture. And I also, as I think what Melissa has to show in a minute, is us been thinking of printmaking and the layering of printmaking, and that has a different kind of drawing activity attached to it as well.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pin my videos so that you can talk as we're looking at the image. You can see my surroundings here. Actually, behind me is a large Barbara Kruger painting, and the Kazuo Shiraga image is just sort of propped in front of it. But the Barbara Kruger is resting for a little bit, and I've actually never gotten to see it in my 2 years at the
Wow.
Okay, so here is the finial of the testosterone teapot.
So forgive me, I'm back. I was just quickly trying to post that link for people.
Thank you, and your timing is perfect. So here we're looking at the testosterone teapot, and I apologize if I'm making anybody dizzy. I'm just sort of picking up my camera here and going free form. We are, of course, looking at the summer panel of the teapot. So we've got multi-spouts. The teapot is sort of as aggressive and in your face as it can be. Matt, you already sort of addressed the way that you like to think deeply about form and the sort of historical connotations of different vessels. But you're really using sort of some of the iconography of like iron stoves and, you know, very kind of masculine design in all of this. You can see all of the rivets and sort of hardware that are putting these together. You've got gun forms that are making up the spouts. And you want to talk about the different panels of imagery. So we start out, if we're looking from sort of the top of the pyramid, we've got the Playboy bunny, then we've got car emblems. I haven't seen a Chrysler emblem in a long time. And then we've got caveman imagery.
The cavemen are doing activities that mirror the sports activities below.
Aha, so here we have the sticks and the cavemen sort of beating each other with sticks, and then below it, we have the boys of summer.
The 4 seasons are defined by the different sports activities that occur in each season.
And so I will flip it around and we will take a look at football as well. So the handle says men and their toys. And I see there's a little NYU logo. Can you talk about that?
I'm not sure. It's just a pennant, the idea of spectator pennant. Yeah.
Okay.
I was teaching at the time, so.
Let's see. And the very bottom. So this was very prescient, I think, prefiguring our digital culture, but you're actually electing to spell out testosterone using digital letters, I guess, sort of scoreboard.
Yeah, exactly.
Letters as well. And then you've got, you know, different bullets. Projectiles that are being shown there. Can you talk a little bit about your fevered brain kind of putting all of these things together? I know that you're someone who likes to entertain yourself in the studio and in coming up with these can you tell me about the editing room floor and what gets left behind in the sketchbook for something like a testosterone teapot?
Sure. You know, I think part of the fun of making a piece like this is not only the chance to comment, it's also driven by solving the problems of ironic juxtapositions and almost like a collage project where each part wants to add up to the bigger whole, and you're sort of playing around with that in addition to more formal aspects of, you know, fitting the surface imagery to the form and all of those things. So it suits me because that really is kind of how my brain works, is this kind of complicated layering of things. So it's, you know, thank God I found something where all that could be somewhat constructively channeled into an activity. But I really enjoyed also slow touching of small brushes and the buildup of the imagery over time, and sort of the slowness and the investment of labor is something that was really important to me at the time as well. Yeah, and this piece started as a wheel thrown object that I then aggressively paddled square. So not only are we thinking of the, you know, trying to pour out of 3 spouts and the messiness like a testosterone driven tea party, but the act of making it had somewhat of that aggressive quality built into the building of the form as well.
I'd love to talk about your prints, Matt, because that is a series and a project that I absolutely adore. And I think you really killed it on that. And it's a fascinating project. And, you know, printmaking and ceramics is a whole nother lecture that we could, or a Zoom that we could do. And I'm just going to say, Garth, if you have a sec to just go on Facebook or whatever, I'm still getting a lot of messages from people who are trying to join, and
okay.
maybe post that.
All right, co-host. So I'm going to have you do your co-hosting duties here, and
Yep.
you and Matt can talk a little bit about this print series. I've got a preparatory image that is showing some of the forms of these speech balloons that are going into the image. And then I'm going to leave this finished image up on the screen and allow you to talk for just a moment.
Sure.
So one of the reasons this project interests me, and of course, you know, we love things for all sorts of reasons, is it's so much about storytelling, and it's so much about leaving a narrative open-ended, which of course appeals to me because I try to do the same thing. But the fact is, so for those who can't really see it or don't know the project as well as I do, and Matt, I'm just going to talk for you. Matt was invited to a printmaking workshop in Florida, and he made this series. Are they etchings?
They're, the actual 2D part is a copper plate etching, and also in a 3D C print of digital print.
Right. So
two processes there.
So Matt is killing it with materials and mediums here, and he slip cast the porcelain speech and thought bubbles, and each panel, which we have a few images of several of them. It has, everybody is speaking or saying things that really, to me, reflect what is actually on people's minds. There's very little that is being directly said. So these pieces to me are about relationships. They're about what is said, what isn't said. You know, here's a couple, well, slightly ambivalent, shall we say, or ambiguous stance.
Go.
And, you know, they're looking off into the distance. They've got kind of a house or a barn or some dwelling behind them. And what they're saying and what they're thinking is this wild jumble of thoughts. And so I don't know if I can go down. Let's see if I can toggle down.
Garth, I should be able to switch this up for you.
Just toggle down. Because what Matt then did is these, here we go, this is perfect. These 3D elements, these fantastic porcelain thought bubbles, speech bubbles, are mounted on little plexi posts, so on top of the prints. So the whole thing, he's taken something that's two-dimensional, flat, great drawing, you know, wonderful image, and then he's popped it into this other dimension. And then the whole piece is then in a plexi box. So it's a completely resolved project. And to me, the marriage of drawing, ceramics, new media, and storytelling is just synthesized so perfectly in this body of work, Matt. And I actually, as you know, requested that you show this because I think it's really innovative, and it's using materials and in a very fresh way. And of course, I love the way it pops between dimensions. And so when you stand farther away from these pieces, the speech bubbles flatten out against the prints, as they should, as they do. And as you get closer, the ideas and the speech and the thought begins to emerge more and more and more. And I mean, isn't that the way people are? Right?
Yes, I kind of liked how the porcelain, you know, the fragility or the perception of preciousness and fragility in the thought. But yeah, these, in some formal ways and material ways, the balloons, the actual internal dialogue in these pieces is more important than the people that are thinking them or speaking them. So there were some interesting things that emerged from handling the materials this way that I really liked.
Yeah, to me, I mean, it's almost a process of, one could look at it as a portrait kind of psychoanalysis. And forgive me if I'm reaching, but you know, there's how we present. There's this smiling person at the carnival, and inside their head is this whirling mass of thoughts and ideas and emotions. And it really captures something that it certainly touches me. I really love these.
Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. I'd like to own one, just saying, just putting it out there.
What you wish for.
So I think, Garth, we're ready.
Okay.
Matt, unless there's anything else we haven't, you know, covered, I just think this is such a great example of also seeing the teapot first, which is more the kind of work you were doing when you and I first met,
Right.
and working with imagery and drawing around vessels, but very much coming from a vessel background, merging it with your beautiful calligraphy and your beautiful handwriting and the images. And then for this body of work, you've really, you know, I of course applaud abandoning the pot, because the pot isn't necessary. This is a whole different thing. Pots are great when they're the right form.
Right.
Obviously, you could have, I guess, smushed this all around a pot, but I applaud the way you evolved into this body of work, which I think is just really super, super original.
Thank you so much, you guys.
And as someone who comes from a bit of a printmaking background myself, the use of embossing in this, you're taking some victory laps, I think, with your use of really process.
They have everything. They have everything going for them.
Indeed. All right, well, thank you so much, Matt, and we are looking forward to having you visit us at some point here at the Everson to reunite you with your pieces in our collection. They get shown frequently.
But don't go away, Matt. We
I'm
need
just
you
there for
here.
the whole thing. Are you kidding?
Okay, all right.
All right, so I'm going to zip through a few more pieces, and some of the pleasures of this series, which really grew out of an in-person class at Syracuse University, is getting to look at the actual pieces from our collection. And I actually don't have this next artist's piece out because getting it out is a little bit more involved. But I want to talk a little bit about Helen Frankenthaler, and there was really a group of post-painterly abstractionists, including Larry Poons, the Texas artist Mary Hood, and others who converged in the mid-1970s under Margie Huda's direction here at the Everson to do a project called New Works in Clay. And almost all of these artists were painters exclusively, and they were given a studio, they were given a little bit of instruction, they were given materials and volunteers to help them do their work. And Helen Frankenthaler, gamely, was one of the artists who came up really with no preconceptions about how she was going to work, and did a project in clay. And this is actually a piece that's in the Everson's permanent collection. I would say it's among Frankenthaler's finest pieces. It's called The Human Edge. It dates from 1967. I think it's bigger than, it's about 12 feet tall. It's a monumental painting, and was actually purchased, I think, with some input from IMPay when the Everson was built, with an eye toward making this one of the iconic pieces that lives in our sculpture court. So Helen Frankenthaler already had that history with the Everson. But I think that the work that she did in clay, Melissa and I were talking about it a little bit, that she had worked in clay before doing this project in Syracuse, and it was more of a limited edition project where she was given slip cast plates and was sort of given free rein to decorate them, but it really was not that far from just working in paint. It was a different material, but very close to the ways that she worked in paint. And I would say that this is a different project entirely. She was thinking about the form and how the form was lived. She was able to dig into the wet clay. Yet she was able to dilute her materials and do some experiments with the way that these oxides and stains and slips existed on the surface of the clay. She was able to carve through it. Melissa, you said an interesting thing when we were talking about this piece. To paraphrase, you said this is sort of a classic first painter getting their hands in clay, and you stressed that you didn't mean that as a pejorative. Can you talk about that observation a little bit more?
Well, I mean, I think it is it is a slight pejorative, only in that there is a long tradition of painters discovering clay. And, you know, the art world, the mainstream art world goes kind of nuts. Oh, ceramics. And Barbara Gladstone did a show in the early 2000s where it was painters working in clay. And it got written up and, you know, and all this attention. And frankly, all the artists I know who work in clay as a sculptural, everybody was like, oh, grad school work. And so I think this is quite beautiful, but I also think it has all the earmarks of painter first touch in clay, you know, where she's done the little scoops. I would love it. You know, the hallmark of the project you were talking about is that they had no instruction. It would have been great to see if somebody had taken her in hand and shown her a little more and let this develop. To me, this is a really interesting first piece, you know, first study. And you know, I think there's some beauty to it. I wish she had done, as I would say if I were her professor, do 10 more. And,
so
show me where you are at the end.
So I wanted to stress that, you know, they were actually given quite a great deal of instruction and technical assistance. And I don't think Margie and her
Wheel
crew,
that back.
yeah, shied away from that. And it was a long-term project. So it wasn't like this was a single piece that she came up and did over a weekend. I mean, she spent, you know, I think well over a month. You know, that's nothing in clay terms, but there was deep engagement. There were multiple pieces that came out. And I did want to say that, you know, it's interesting. I think there's a big difference between 1975, when these pieces were done, and the early 2000s. These pieces landed like a lead balloon in the art world. They're almost unknown. There were no mainstream reviews of the New Works in Clay exhibition. And even a lot of the artist galleries, I've been making a concerted effort to contact Larry Poons's gallery and other galleries to let them know what we have and to signal the interest of trying to track down other pieces. And
I would love to see more of them, because I think, you know, when I see this piece and then I see the painting and I start to see the dialogue between them, and I've seen many more of her paintings than her ceramics, I think seeing these in group would be very, very interesting.
I think also experiencing this piece in person is, of course, an entirely different sort of ball of wax. I took the liberty of grabbing a few other Helen Frankenthaler drawings, and it's interesting that we're going to be talking about a range of strategies, and one of the reasons why you're an ideal person to host this is that you seem to employ every strategy that we're talking about, from focus on materiality to kind of strict preparatory drawings, to drawings that are meant to be sort of soup to nuts finished artworks in and of themselves. But I was tickled when I was able to actually find this preparatory drawing from a Frankenthaler composition.
Is this from one of the ceramic pieces
No,
or for a painting?
This is for a painting.
Oh, interesting. It's a very nice drawing, just as it is.
No, I completely agree.
Yeah.
And this is a little bit more, you know, what you would come to expect from Helen Frankenthaler drawing. She's really pushing the material into the paper and showing you kind of the quality of the paper. It's got some of her signature sort of use of color and balance of color. But then it's interesting that, like, with the scoops that are coming through the ceramic piece, you have these bold, kind of, sharp, sort of lines. And I think also experiencing this piece in person is, of course, an entirely different like Conte lines or
Right.
lines that are coming through on it. So, you know, I'm sort of putting Helen Frankenthaler out there as one model, and she's using abstraction, but one of the real sort of through lines, I would say, between post-painterly abstraction and the current state of ceramics is that they were really sensing a type of materiality and pushing the paint to emphasize sort of painty qualities, using it as staining to, you know, her and Morris Lewis, letting it soak into the canvas. And as we, I don't know, evaluate the conceptual strategy of a lot of current artists who are working, there's a real stressing of using material in that way.
Yeah, I have to say this drawing would be beautiful and perfect if it had, if you had told me this was a preparatory drawing for a ceramic piece. You know, I could totally see how, you know, smushing those colors in with those harder lines. That would have been beautiful in clay.
Yes, so I think there's a lot unsaid in the New Works in Clay project, but it's interesting that there was a real variety of artists. And if you're not familiar with the project, I'm going to be making sure that the Everson continually revisits it. And I'd like to do a project actually where we tour the pieces and track down more of the pieces. Billy Al Bankston actually went into the Syracuse China factory and did a series of China painted vessels, demi-tasse sets, where he was creating different strategies and marks for other people to execute using his designs, but they are all about sort of brush strokes and the way that glaze and China paint all works together. So I will do, I think, at some point a session just zeroing in on that, and I'll make sure that you get that invite, Melissa.
Thank you.
So I've just got a couple more artists that I wanted to touch on, and I've really got to make sure that we zip through them so that
we're moving a little probably slower than we want to, I think.
Indeed. I want to welcome everybody who was intrepid and came from a corrected Facebook link and actually had the fortitude to join us. So thank you for doing that. Thank you, Melissa, and other people who commented on it. So this is a piece in the Everson's collection. It is called Lifestyle Magic Platter. It dates to 1989, and to my knowledge, this is the earliest Grayson Perry piece in any American museum. And it came through Garth Clark's gallery, and they did a very early show of Grayson Perry, although Grayson Perry has sort of denied it and has said that a different, larger show that he did was his American debut, which is not true. But at the time that Grayson Perry made this, I mean, this is pre-Turner Prize, way pre-Turner Prize. Let's see. Oh, and let me, I'm actually going to unshare my screen here so that we can take a closer look at the piece itself.
So I am a huge Grayson Perry fan, and I want to thank you for including his work.
And so Grayson Perry, I would say, if we are talking about his strategies when it comes to drawing, I would say that he fits fairly neatly with a lot of Matt Nolan's strategies in that he is a very active sketchbooker user. But I think that his sketchbooks are a very generative source of his work that makes its way, his drawings that make their way both onto the vessels and his tapestries, and increasingly, you know, paintings and other mixed media objects. So I'm going to hold up. This is something that you don't get to see very often. So this is early. His studio and facility, you know, was not super technically involved. He's using a slump mold. You can see that this is a terracotta, super iron-rich terracotta clay. Even the glaze that he's using on the back is like a little bit milky, but I suspect that he really liked those qualities. And here's the front of the piece. I would say it measures about 18 inches or 17 inches in width. And it has two figures on it. And I'm going to zoom in because this piece really has a lot of the hallmarks of what you saw in the vessels that really sort of won him the Turner Prize. And that's a variety of marks when it comes to the way that he's drawing and painting and using underglaze. He's also very actively using different types of pre-made decals, sometimes over-firing the decals so that they get these washed out colors. And he's also using, I 1000% believe that this is probably a photocopier toner decal, which is incredibly common right now, but this is like 1988, and I can't think of any other artist who was using them quite that early. It could be that this is silk screened, but and you can see the way that all of the words are actually stamped in. So he's really sort of making this a lexicon of different marks that you can make from sort of hand incision to stamping to drawing and painting and decals.
I mean, one of the things that people often say, I think, when they see work like this is, oh, you know, why bother doing it on a ceramic platter? Why not just make it a drawing? And what's significant is that he is stamping, he is working, besides using all the processes, which now, of course, with digital media, you know, you could replicate at least the look of this with your computer. But what Grayson Perry did is he really started to, he used the clay, meaning that things are stamped into it. And he created a dimensionality in the surface, which, as you know, I respond to tremendously, but there's a reason why it has to be on clay. And that's because he's really pushing and pulling it instead of just using the clay as a passive surface.
And I think, you know, this shows that he had those instincts from the surface.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, you and I were talking a little bit about, I think it's pretty certain that, you know, in the climate, as Grayson Perry was beginning to work, he found clay to be sort of a deliciously low material working in. And I think that, you know, those connotations of hobby and where you go to work in ceramics and how you work in ceramics plays into, you know, the end product in here. And it's interesting all of the ways that the art world is sort of, I don't know, caught up with him. And it's hard to even, you know, talk to an undergraduate, say, about what the climate was like in the late 1980s in terms of the art world and sort of acceptance of ceramics.
You know, one of the things is, I mean, I think Grayson Perry took great delight in using this very lowbrow medium, pottery. He didn't even make ceramic sculpture, he made pots. And then he surrounded them with scenes of psychosexual drama, with sex acts, with all, and they're not just dirty pots, but I mean, but with things from his psyche and emotional content. So he had this, you know, very deliciously perverse idea of taking the most, and especially in the UK, you know, the most low art, ceramics, and surrounding it with this work that was, you know, popping right out of his subconscious. It's pretty brilliant.
And, you know, I don't want to give short shrift to the iconography that's on our pot. There are two figures on it. There is gender fluidity going on within those two figures. And a lot of the words that are stamped in around the rim of the piece relate to different sort of class-based identities in the UK, including one that wasn't really familiar to me until I started to look around, which is the concept of the Essex Man, which is an archetype of a sort of conservative male white person in the UK. So I'm going to show a few of his drawings, and we're going to
zip. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let me share my screen really quickly. So look at these sketchbook drawings. I mean, we have various states of his sketchbook drawings, but using these markers and, you know, the doodling quality mixed with kind of amazing observation. Like he's taking notes here. I don't know, his innate ability to kind of create these observational slice of life drawings that are full of all of these details really mirrors what goes into his final pieces. Absolutely adore this vessel that's on the left. And I've got to say, like, you know, he managed to capture sort of the vitality and gesture of his drawing style in the way that he constructs his pots. I love when he's working with iconography and working with sort of, I don't know, Iron Age or medieval iconography with his portraits of Alan Measles, his teddy bear. He is a baller sketcher. The last person, I'm going to skip over Kenneth Dirk, who is an incredible artist who's in the Everson's collection, to be able to talk about Annabeth Rosen. And Annabeth Rosen, I've always loved her work, and she works in ceramics in a way that she's constantly engaging her hands, in a way that she's churning out variations on the same form, which she then uses as the raw materials to put together for sculptures later. And her drawing processes come as generative ways to sort of create forms when she's bundling and putting together all of the smaller pieces that she's using. But I was interested when I saw her actually doing an artist talk about her own work. She said something that really struck me. I've always liked her drawings, and she said that consistently when she's doing drawings, the drawings are like 3 years ahead of where her sculptures are. So I've got a variety of drawings that I've picked out for her. They contain this, you know, this gesture. They contain the repetition of many smaller forms into a larger form. And one of the things that I'll say, you know, if you compare this piece in the Everson's collection to one of these drawings, there's a sense of labor and just the work of addressing the mark making and addressing the sort of richness of the surface that relates to the repetition of just making and creating all of these pieces that come together in the studio. Do you have observations about sort of that strategy, Melissa, and ways that that strategy kind of relates to your own intuition and process when you're drawing?
Well, I don't know. I mean, for my own work, I can't say that anything is consistently 2 or 3 years ahead or behind. I do find that if something stays in my studio long enough, I will go back in and rework it and rework it and rework it. And I've done that to pieces that I have been around for, 10 years or so. So I do understand, and I do relate to this sense of a kind of back and forth and bodies of work talking to each other. I think her drawings stand very much on their own. I saw the preparatory drawings in the studio shot, and I think, which are very interesting to me. They're beautiful. I mean, I think she's a terrific artist and a terrific drawer. These more finished drawings, I mean, I would be very happy to see a whole drawing show of her work because they so strongly stand on their own. They're clearly her handwriting, if you will, her artistic handwriting. And they're clearly her thought process in using lots of little elements, little things to make a bigger whole. But they're very, they're beautiful. They're beautiful and they're strong, and they've got a really striking voice all on their own. It's not as if one needs the other to support, or you need to read one to understand the other. They are fully blown, realized bodies of work that work nicely, beautifully together, but also beautifully independently.
Great. So before we bring up some of your images, I just wanted to recap a little bit using the artists that we looked at, just to think about the whole spectrum of ways that drawing feeds into ceramics. So sort of at its most basic level, you have the preparatory drawing and working in 2 dimensions to work out form or imagery that is going to go on pieces. You have sort of an intuitive or autonomic sketching process that is generative, putting pen to paper or drawing materials to paper to sort of generate and spark ideas that then have a relationship to other pieces or finished pieces. You have, I think, ideas of improvisation and responding to, in abstract ways, sort of one mark building on the next. Peter Volkos, I think, worked very sort of strongly in that vein and loved to think about improvisational music. And then you have materiality, which I think is a common thread that goes through specific ways that a lot of my favorite ceramic artists have responded to, using drawing materials as ways to equate their ceramic materials in the studio. And then, of course, I think that there are gray areas where all of those things sort of link together. But I would say offhand that all of those things apply to the ways that I see you using drawing in your studio practice. Are there holes that you want to fill in as we introduce your work in terms of ways that you see drawing operating within sort of your larger studio practice?
I think you kind of covered it all.
Okay. Oh my gosh, we're skipping over
Oh no.
but,
I think
that
we
will
have
be
to.
a future
Right.
sort of project all in its own.
I mean, I think part of, and this may sound funny to many, what I may have struggled with in terms of technical things over the years, I have benefited in many ways from actually not having really gone to art school, in that I didn't learn a lot of the rules, particularly in ceramics. So breaking the rules, was not so much of an issue. My attitude has always been, why not? And from the very get-go, why not paint and draw on clay? I'm not tied to, though I will say I have a great respect for ceramic traditions. And over the years, as I've taught, and it's beautiful, but much of it never really related to the ideas that I was trying to express. And the same things with painting and drawing. It's always been a why not kind of attitude. And the two bodies of work really speak to each other. I mean, they really resonate back and forth. But I think you already said that.
So tell us a little bit. So the figuration, I think, is something that is a touchstone for your work. And there's a certain level of, so I'm going to use the word anthropomorphization, which is sort of wrong here, but you are a lot of times taking feelings or taking imagery that sort of enters your head, and you are anthropomorphizing them and giving them a sort of figural equivalent. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how your drawings are sort of literalizing kind of feelings and fleeting things?
Well, I think the most, the biggest impetus, the thing that spurs me forward is storytelling. And whether it's, and I don't think my pieces are literally narrative. in that there's a beginning, middle, end in the traditional sense. Like, they're not illustrations, but basically. But I think there is an emotional beginning, middle, end, and that when they are successful, they are a complete short story in and of themselves. So most of the pieces start out with really simple things: an idea, a feeling, a memory, a material, a desire to give myself a ridiculous assignment, a problem that I have to solve. One of the things that may be a little hard to see on the screen is actually the teeth on this woman, girl. These are ceramic. So several years ago, I started making what I use the kind of quaint old-fashioned term, I call them assemblage, because they're three-dimensional collages, and really trying to marry my drawings and my sculptures. Because for years, I made drawings that were very layered, very dimensional. There was a lot of surface, a lot of push and pull in the surface. And then I made sculptures that had drawings on them. And it seemed like a very logical step to try and put those together. And that's a beautiful piece to go to next. This is called—
I thought so.
Thank you. This is called Squad. And, you know, this is, and of course, once you start working in the realm of drawing and painting, and that ridiculous square or that ridiculous rectangle that seems to bound drawings and paintings, which I've never quite understood. I mean, that's why I've never been a painter or strictly a drawer. It's like, why stop at the edges? Why stop at the edges when you could keep going? And so this is a piece where they are literally walking into, through, and out of the picture frame. As I said to you yesterday, I could have very easily made these figures out of wood. That would have been super simple, but no, they are made out of clay.
So I want to back up a little bit, and one of the things that we haven't really talked about is personality type. And you are someone who loves to bring psychology, I think, into the conversation whenever possible. And particularly when I'm teaching or when I'm, doing a sort of visiting artist or visiting critic gig at a school, I like to talk a lot about, our own personalities and how we find analogs for that within our work. One of my favorite entry points for that is a much discussed thing called Muppet Theory. And so that is the theory that where personalities go, there is a continuum from, I would say, Bert from Sesame Street on one side to Animal from the Muppets on the other. And you can place every Muppet along the continuum somewhere. So you can do that with every person and their personality. But I think a thing that happens a lot with artists is that they have split personalities in some ways. Their artistic personality may behave in a different way than their own personality does. Can you talk a little bit about, are you, I know that as a thinker, you seem to be a fairly unfettered person who is not afraid to speak their mind, and that would, in my observation, extend to the studio, where it would appear like you are working in a space that is not necessarily incredibly preconceived. You allow yourself certain freedoms, but I sense that maybe there is like a dynamic of struggle between what's in here and what you're trying to get into the paper. Can you confirm or deny or talk about that in the studio?
I can confirm.
Okay.
And I mean, in some ways, I think that's what many artists have. I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but the idea that's in your head, and how do you make that an object of some sort? And you know, what you may have been told as a child about what you can or can't do or should or shouldn't do, and the desire to break those rules as an artist. I think also that that tension is very much what I'm interested in. And I hope when my works succeed, they're really walking the line. They're walking the line between emotions, between feelings. I think in some ways, I think that a lot of the pieces are very formal structurally. I mean, I think like the piece you have up now is a very formal kind of bust. And I do think that beauty is underrated in the art world often. And so I do have a great love of making beautiful shapes or graceful shapes. And then taking that kind of scrawl and that, you know, that hand with an oil stick, because again, that reinforces a kind of emotional content of outside and inside. Obviously, this is part of why I love that body of work of Matt so much. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, it definitely begins to get at that. How much do you operate out of self-doubt or second guessing, or does the studio become sort of a place that is free of that?
Oh no, it's constant. I mean, I operate out of place of fear and terror.
Okay.
Fear that I have nothing left to say, terror that I won't be able to say it. And then the third part is that no one will ever see it or understand it. So those are my motivating factors. And yet, you know, there are moments in the studio where I'll make something and I'll just go, oh yeah, you know, like ding, ding. But my pieces take a long time, and what looks deceptively simple or childlike or slapdash is exactly the opposite. As any artist on this Zoom will tell you, the hardest thing to do is to make it look effortless. And so, yes, there are things that emerge fully blown from my head that I step back and I go, how did I do that? And then there are things that, you know, struggle. And this is a funny piece. It's called Friends. And it was written for my project that has been touring around museums called the Talking Cure. And this is, interestingly, it's clay and it's pen and ink and pencil and liquid rubber on the little figure in the front with oil stick and a bunch of mixed materials. You can see the clay is incised. On the figure on the left, the clay is incised and filled with ink. On the figure in the back, the ink is on the surface. So again, I'm using, you know, Grace and Perry, like, you know, why aren't they just a drawing on paper? Because I'm using a dimensionality. And this body of work is basically me collaborating with 12 writers and 12 actors. And each, I'm going to give you the condensed version. I made 24 pieces, 12 sculptures and 12 drawings. Each writer was invited in to choose a piece that spoke to them and write a 3-minute monologue of what they thought my sculpture was thinking. They were then recorded by professional actors, put up in a cloud. We generated QR codes so that when you hit the code with your phone, it speaks. So they are talking sculptures, and even, I think even more significant, there's a book that accompanies the exhibition, and it is literally a talking book. So if you're sitting and reading the book, you can hit the code with your phone and the book speaks to you. And so these pieces, and I think there are a couple, there's some drawings from the series, came from one place in me. I invited people to interpret them in whatever way they wanted. And Garth is now showing 4 drawings from that series. And so the drawings, they're not drawings of sculptures or sculptures of drawings. They are literally meant to be in dialogue. They are really meant to go back and forth and talk to each other and then talk to the public. And with this exhibition comes curriculum for working with students, for working with communities. I usually come out to a community and work with various groups. I've worked with kids, I've worked with veterans. It's an extremely rich project that has been the project of a lifetime for me in terms of what I never imagined I could do. It also is really kind of a perfect marriage of drawing and sculpture. They cannot live without each other. I have been asked by several museums, would I show the drawings without the sculpture and the sculptures without the drawings? And I can't. It's one unit.
So oddly, one word that I just realized that in this whole conversation about drawing, I don't think I've used the word mark making once, which is kind of a pity, like not great on my part. But when I think of ceramics and mark making, I really kind of came of age. I've talked about this a little bit in talking about Matt. Really started taking classes and learning in the early 1990s. And in the early 1990s, within the ceramisphere, there was the gesture was the ascendant sort of language. And I think a lot of that comes out of Peter Volkos's interpretation, the love of Japanese ceramics. And there was an approach to mark making and treating the surface of the clay as if it were frosting in a certain way. It was supposed to look kind of effortless. And that, I would say, has flipped 100% when it comes to younger artists and what is, I think, ascendant in the art world right now. A more type of, I don't know, I would call it a searching line, a searching mark that doesn't portray itself with sort of easy frosting grace. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to, I guess, the pathos of mark making, and how does mark making mirror your intellectual process in the studio?
Well, I think, as always, I think technique is in any medium, technique should be at the service of ideas. So the marks I make are whatever marks are necessary for that piece. And forgive me, tell me if you hear a lawnmower in the background, because I do. I think that, it's kind of getting to the kernel of what the hell am I trying to say, or what are these pieces trying to say? And then using the material, whatever material that may be, whether it's graphite. I mean, these pieces are literally drawn on with graphite. They are three-dimensional drawings, or liquid rubber in the piece that we saw previously, because liquid rubber kind of coats the figure in a very weird, thorough way. So I have made very precise drawings. I'm not sure, we may have a few of them. We skipped over a few things. And I've made these pieces that are much more emotional. Those four portraits, if you will, represent 4 states from the Psychological Diagnostic Handbook. And then, so I think, having a freedom of hand, if you will, and not being constrained by what I should do or shouldn't do, or anybody should or do, but finding the story, finding the idea, and then finding the materials and the techniques to make that work. This piece, which is called Half-Life, and this is from an ongoing series of pieces where I'm really trying to break that canvas, if you will, and also meld the ceramics with the drawing in again, when they succeed, what should look like an effortless way. Like, this piece was born this way. It could never be any other way. And on the right, that's a piece of collaged handmade paper. We haven't really talked about materials, and we don't have to, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's about, for me, it's not being married to materials. It's about being married to ideas. And you could be the greatest technician in the world. You could make the most spectacular drawings of whatever genre. But if they're empty of ideas, and to me, of stories, they're more exercises. Does that answer your question?
No, I think absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm just very curious about every material, I think, has emotional weight, and clay
Right.
is often sort of used exclusively for, you know, its beauty. And you are using, I think, in a lot of cases, like these grogged white clay bodies that, and the surfaces, you know, rather than being entirely sort of smoothed and buffed down,
Right.
and rather than being toasty and stonewary, you know, are, you know, fraught with like finger marks and sort of non-show-offy, frosting-y surfaces.
Right.
That's
Well,
not where you're going.
I think, well, first of all, I use the same clay body as the great Viola Fry.
Nice.
I met her in 1984, and she told me two things. She gave me her clay recipe, and she said, you can work much slower and much drier than anybody ever told you could. And which really opened up the path for me being able to make what I make. And so I happen to think it's a beautiful color. You know, it's like it's a very creamy, it's not white. I mean, you can see it here juxtaposed to white. It's not white, it's a very, very creamy color. There are pieces that are smoother and a little less rough, but I guess it speaks to who I am and what I'm trying to say as an artist, to have some of the shows of the marks of the making. The marks in the surface. It is a heavily grogged body, so if I drag something against it, I can pull up that material. The other thing, and again, forgive me, I didn't give you any slides of it. I use clay like a chameleon. I feel like I know how to work the surface so that it can look like stone or wood or concrete. In fact, the most common question I get asked, besides what's it all about, is what's that material? And to me, that's the greatest success. And it's not because I don't like clay. I love working in clay, and I love working in it because I can make it look like anything.
So to that end, I think this is a good piece to switch to, and I think this kind of blows up my question slightly about, you know, sort of the pathos of the material, and you've gone in and sort of rubbed stain or a material in to emphasize the textural qualities of the clay here. And you are sort of working toward, I think, a much more, I would say, luscious surface and sort of depth in here. And then, of course, there's the, you know, formal contrast between the sort of organic body parts and the shape of the house and the iconography of the house. So can you talk a little bit about this being kind of a place of sort of power and investigation on multiple levels for you?
Well, you know, when going through my images, I realized that this image of this little red house has been appearing in my work in different ways since the mid-'80s. And it's almost like the Monopoly game house, but it's also, it works on several levels. It's a house, it's a home, it's a shelter, it's a prison, it's many things to many people. It's comfort, it's terror. It's also a beautiful abstract shape. And so in this piece in particular, and the house, I have to say, is actually made out of wood, because I needed it to be precise. So one of the things of using this very formal shape against that kind of organic form of the legs and the feet and the shoes is, again, that push and pull. And I think if I had to, you know, kind of sum it up, there's a lot of tension in my work. And I think there's a lot of tension between materials, between emotions, and certainly between forms. And the idea of constraint and freedom. You know, we could go into a very, a much deeper psychological talk, but, you know, I'm aware of these things, but I'm not conscious of them, if that makes any sense. And one of the questions you had asked me earlier, what I try and do when I'm in the studio is a funny dance between working consciously and also unhinging my brain. And because I need to be a little unhinged to really get to those ideas, to get to those things, and unhinged could also be, I could use the word open. And yet at the same time, if you're making sculptures or you're making drawings, you have to, oh my God, is this going to stand up? Is it going to fall down? You know, is that material going to rot in 3 months? You know, I'm aware of a lot of things. Again, none of the things that look the simplest are conceptually the hardest. You know, boiling things down to what people often, I have to say, sometimes say look childlike. I mean, this is hardly childlike. Yet, if either of your daughters looked at this, they would immediately be able to tell a story about it. And maybe that's part of my goal, is that to tell a story that both your lovely daughters could tell or retell, and anyone else. So there's a lot going on.
So this is a good opportunity to kind of jump into the present and to talk a little bit about the time period between the current body of drawings that you've been working on. You actually mentioned that you did a body of work that was prescient when it came to sort of current notions of, you know, home for all of us over the last 4 months. And the notion of home has taken on sort of a much, you know, it's a place of refuge, but it's also a place of sort of enforced solitude over the last 4 months. And you had mentioned that you had done a body of work that kind of presaged that.
Yeah, it's a little scary, and you should probably be worshiping me as an oracle. But last summer, this is from the end of the summer. This was a piece that will go to Shanghai eventually. I did a lot of pieces about houses and homes and girls running away. I did a whole series of drawings and a sculpture called Runaway. There's a whole series of drawings. There's a very large drawing, 50 by 50 inches. That is a house form, this perfect house form that is stuffed with people. And it's all collaged images from old Life magazines from the 1940s. And so, yeah, yes, I seem to have had some impending sense of doom, I guess. What are you going to do?
But we haven't talked much about collage, although it came in a little bit with the Grayson Perry and his use of decals within his ceramic process. Can you talk about sort of the ways that collage works in your work in terms of, I don't know, giving you a freedom or introducing that sense of improvisation that we talked about with Peter Volkos,
Right.
without making it, I don't know.
You can go to the next drawing because that actually, there we go. So I have long used collage. I have a huge collection of Life magazines from the 40s and 50s, which I originally were drawn to because of the amazing, mostly the advertisements, frankly, the sense of how men and women were portrayed during that era. And also certainly World War II, which was a formative, I did not live through World War II, just for the record, but my parents did. And, you know, so I was fascinated by how Life magazine was portraying the world at that time. And I started using the images, particularly in the images of men and women. And there's a sense of optimism, whether it's false or not. There's certainly these crazy, rigid gender roles of women who are housewives, essentially, and moms, and the way the ads are. So all of these images, that is Jean Sibelius, by the way, on the lower right, in case you were wondering. And I like the push and the pull. between my line and the line of the photographs, the line of the magazine images. And I happen to think that that's an interesting push and pull. And somehow these people, this image of Jean Sibelius from the early 1950s with this girl dancing on his head seems to make sense to me. You know, and I think I love having them talk to each other. I love how incongruous and absurd it is. And, you know, absurdity certainly plays a big role in my worldview. Yeah, more so now than ever before, right? Because the world is kind of absurd.
Is this one of the pieces that is destined for the Does She or Doesn't She exhibition?
It is, and it certainly comes out of a dreaming of haircuts.
Hairdressing. I today got my first in-person haircut in 4 months. So
there are a couple of these that are. There you go. And you know, again, you were asking about what kind of line I can do. This felt like the right kind of line. These are pen and ink, very unforgiving medium to work in on very soft collaged drawing papers. So, you know,
I
it
like
all comes.
that you brought up the idea of the Zoom grid when we were talking about some of these pieces.
This is my second Zoom drawing because I find Zoom kind of insane. It's kind of crazy, right? Here we are. This is a hair salon. Dreaming of the salon.
Oh my gosh. Let's see. And then how about this multimedia piece?
So this is one of the first things I did when I got up here in March, and I was gobsmacked, as I think many of us were, by what suddenly seemed to explode, certainly in New York City. And this is a found object. It's a vintage Mexican mask. And I mean, I try not to tell you the end of the story. I try not to tell anybody what to think. I was certainly gobsmacked, bewildered. One could even say a little bit depressed, but mostly bewildered, as I think, you know, many people would remember March. We're like, what is going on? And I made this drawing, very, very simple. And, you know, it morphed into relating to this piece. I can't analyze it any deeper, except it really captures a mood of a minute, of a time. I will not cop to saying it's a self-portrait. I think everything I do is a self-portrait in some way. But it is of that moment.
So I've got a question here from Sam Gruber, actually, an old friend of yours, Melissa, and lives here in Syracuse. So he asks that when you're collaging from old magazines, are you using the original cutout print? Are you photocopying, or is there like a photorealist drawing that you're doing of them?
No, I never draw them. It's a great question. I used to use the original images, and then I realized that there were a lot of images that were my icons that I needed to use over and over again. And if you looked at all my work, you'd see some of these faces popping up again. So I color Xerox them. Even the black and white ones are color Xeroxed on acid-free paper. So I have the freedom. I have a huge, enormous image bank. And so I have the freedom to use, you know, I can use Jean Sibelius, you know, 22 times. If I need him, if I need him to speak to my thoughts.
I think, like a lot of artists, it seems like you are using your artwork as a way to sort of understand and process the world. Are there big differences in the way that your drawing processes operate in that manner versus the way that your sculptures operate?
Well, there's certainly a physicality about sculpture that is always, for those of you on this call who make sculpture in any material, except maybe fabric, you know, sculpture, and particularly in clay, it's big, it's heavy, it's fragile, you know, so there's limitations to what you can do. There's a fluidity to drawing. You know, I can make shapes and I can make people do things that I would have a lot harder time doing in clay. And yet I can say things with the surface and with the drawing on the sculptures that I can say, that I might not be saying with the form. The form may be more elemental, but what I can say on top of it is reaches what I'm really trying to express. So they need each other. I need them both. I can't imagine doing one without the other.
So I think that is a place where we're going to have to kind of draw things to a close for this conversation. There's a lot more that I think could be said. And I look forward to future conversations
Thank you, me too.
Build on this. I'd like to thank you, Melissa, and I'd like to invite anybody who wants to stay on. I'm going to stop recording and stop streaming to Facebook, but anyone who wants to unmute themselves and say hi and hang out for 15, 20 minutes, this is the after party is really what
Bring your own tequila.
Indeed. I'm at work right now, so maybe not, but
yeah, I know what was in that espresso cup.
We do have some very skunky beer, like meant for receptions back in like March, that it could be probably had right now.
But if anybody wants to ask me any other questions, certainly I can also talk offline. I'm very willing to give out my email. Certainly, as far as I'm concerned as an artist, there are no technical secrets. If anybody wants to know anything, actually, like how is that done, or what is that, or what material, I can give you my email. If anybody just wants to chat and chew, give me a hard time, give me an easy time, tell me what they're thinking, I would love that.
All right, so we welcome any comments from the Peanut Gallery. Join us again via the link, the right link. I apologize again for that, but join us for next week's session, which I am working on right now. Pay attention to the Eversons' social media and our webpage to learn more about what is coming up. And remember that we are opening up on August 2nd to the public. So thank you for everyone. Thank you, Matt Nolan, for joining us, and especially thank you, Melissa.
Oh, thank you. And there's a question where someone wants to see some of the slides again. I don't know if you can put those up or...
No, I absolutely can. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and stop streaming to